Welcome back, Inebri-ites. This is Andy of the Inebri-art podcast, as always. And if you've listened to any episodes, you know I'm not a millennial or Gen Zer, and that's not like being an ageist and trashing on them. I'm just old. And everyone's been telling me that I need to promote the podcast on TikTok. So finally I gave in, I signed up, and I haven't done anything productive other than waste hours and hours scrolling through TikTok. And on that, I have come across. I didn't ask you, man. Is it Crosson? Is that the correct pronunciation?
Crosson.
So Jesse Crosson, who's at @2nd_Chancer on TikTok, and I was fascinated by your channel. It just jumped out to me. I think mostly because I find people who have kind of turned around their lives in dramatic ways amazing. And you spent a lot of time incarcerated, and you're out now, and you're kind of using TikTok as a platform to basically educate people about like the real world, like what it's really like.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, it is. I just, there's this interest in prison. There's this interest in places we don't know about. There's an interest in war, just these kind of extreme environments. And it's something that I think we have a lot of popular myths and ideas that are just really blatantly wrong, at least, where I was in prison or where most people are in prison, where, the kind of trauma isn't the big, prison riots or the sexual assaults or the things that we think about on a daily basis. And those do exist in some systems, but it's much more the kind of dehumanization or the lack of support, or it's the kind of casual dismissal of people's humanity. And then when we look at the whole purpose of the criminal justice system, which is to, keep people away from society, reform them and release them, we're doing a really bad job. Like if we were to design a system that was about as little or least effective as possible, like what we have would be a really good start. Yet we don't think about it because, until I got locked up, I didn't know anybody that was in prison. I remember one family friend who went away when I was a kid, and remember we would get letters where they would melt the candy from M&Ms to get different colors, and he would draw it on the envelope. But he never talked about it. He never talked about what happened. He never talked about trying to get past it. And he had a really traumatic experience because the prison system was a little bit different then. But yeah, I was able to, get a second chance in life. And really, I was able to get a second chance because I had people who believed in me and supported me and gave me opportunities and gave me chances other people didn't have. And I don't think that's right. I think that saying, okay, well, if you happen to come from a middle-class family, you've got a chance after prison. Or if you happen to come from, strong community support, you have a chance. But if you don't, we're just going to kind of throw you away casually, or we're not going to extend these opportunities to you. So my whole platform, my whole hope is to provide other people with those same chances and opportunities so that hopefully more people can succeed. And if people with all of that, with all the support and opportunities, continue to try to, throw their lives away, well, okay, now we can pass judgment, or now we can say that, we've done all we can. But until we support people and give them a chance, we really can't say that they're failing, or they're not trying, or they're not doing what they're supposed to.
Yeah, I always find it fascinating. I've had people tell me that jail's about punishment and, yada, yada, yada. But I'm I just don't think they get it. It's we don't typically lock people away for life. Most people are going to get out at some point, and then they're going to come live next door to somebody. And it's would you rather the guy who's been locked in solitary for years and years live next to you, or someone who's been kind of trained isn't the right word, but kind of given some real world experiences and taught hey, empathy and how to be a better person and trying to reform, and come out of prison and do something good.
Absolutely. And it's interesting in the topic of the podcast, one of the places I've seen so much growth and healing in prison is art and the creativity and the craftsmanship and the different things that people do. Because for me, I learned to draw when I was at Nottoway. So this was fairly early on in my sentence. And I'd never imagined that I was good at anything. I'd always just kind of been okay at everything. And I wasn't an incredible artist. And I ended up stopping that it's a long story. But what I saw was an ability in myself, a potential that I hadn't realized. I had taken art in middle school and I had done a horrible job, and the flowers didn't look like flowers, and I felt like I couldn't do anything. But I had somebody who had all the time in the world and who was interested, and he showed me how to draw. And I remember the first time I did originally just a pencil and then a colored pencil portrait of my grandfather. And I sent it to him, and he was like, "Oh my God, Jesse, this is amazing. This looks just like me. I'm going to put this up on the wall." It gave me a sense of kind of meaning and value, and it added something to my life that had previously been missing. And I watched a number of guys learn how to do, popsicle sticks or carvings or art, visual art or music or all these different things they did that really contributed to who they were as a person, which was a part of the reform process. And absolutely none of it was taught by the Department of Corrections. It was all kind of internal. It was all social, but it showed me the potential of art and creativity and craftsmanship to really turn people's lives around.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because even most artists or creative types in general, I've always said I feel like, and I don't know which comes first. It's very like chicken or egg, but I feel like most artists or creatives have a dark side of some kind, and whether that dark side creates the creative mindset or that we end up in a creative mindset that kind of help us deal with whatever demons, whether it be mental troubles or drug abuse or whatever those troubles be. It seems to go hand in hand a lot. And so I wonder if it has, and I'm making a lot of presumptions, I shouldn't, but it has to help with a bit of an escapism in prison to be able to draw or sculpt or play music and find stuff to fill the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, the medium that really spoke to me eventually was writing. Like, I was really passionate about writing. I was passionate about language. I didn't do so much fiction. I did some poetry, and I mostly just wrote stories. I wrote experiences I'd had or perspective or essays. And it again gave me that feeling of like a sense of meaning and something to do, because a big part of my story was drugs, and it was self-destructive behavior, and it was kind of just like bouncing around like a billiard ball in the universe. And having some way to connect with other people and connect with the world and share a part of myself and then receive other people, that was really what I was looking for my whole life. And art or writing or all these other different mediums allowed me to find that, and were a big part of the kind of change of who I was. And so watching other people go through that process, watching people find a way to kind of harness that energy that had previously destroyed them, was really powerful. And I mean, there were still guys inside. We had severely mentally ill guys. We had guys that were still shooting dope. We had guys that were, still doing anything you can imagine. But oftentimes it was kind of these structured environment or these structured activities or these structured things that brought them into connection either with themselves or with the people or the world around them that really kind of stabilized them and gave them a way to live.
So you've clearly kind of turned things around for yourself. You got released early. Is it like, was there one moment inside that kind of like changed your perspective and you're like, oh, I'm gonna, like, what was that spark? Was it just the fact that you were inside and you're like, oh, I got to get my life together? Or was there something that happened inside that like really kind of changed you?
I mean, there was no one moment. There are a lot of kind of like stops along the way, or like kind of memories. But no, it was often failures. I mean, it was going to prison and having no sense of hope. I remember I was sitting in the jail before I was sentenced, and I just felt like there was no way. My life was over. I had ruined it. I was of no value. I was irredeemable. And yet people like showed me that I wasn't. People loved me. I got mail. My mother said, look, we're going to get you an education. I was like, why? I'm going to be in prison for like 10 years or 15 years. And I ended up getting a lot longer than that. But these people who continued to believe in me and kind of show me my value, that was really the spark, or that was the beginning. But then it was, mistakes, and it was making bad decisions. It was falling back in a hole and becoming depressed and trying to figure out how to claw my way out. And there were moments of just like kind of absolute inhumanity. I remember there was a gang assault that happened at the prison. And I remember watching two guys just stomping on this guy's head over and over and over. And something about that moment just kind of shocked me, because I realized as I looked around and everybody was like casually dismissing the fact that somebody was like basically being murdered. And just assuming that this was okay, and realizing like, I cannot let this place define me. I cannot let this place like take the last of me, my humanity, or shape the way that I see the world, or shape the way that I interact with other people. And I haven't always succeeded at being the best person there. I haven't always succeeded at like rising to my own values. But I realized like those were the moments that I realized like I have to decide upon my values, and I have to be the one to live up to them. And really, I need help. I need to find the allies and the people who want to live in that same way. And so a big part of my process was not only finding new people, but also kind of cutting out old relationships, whether they were people I still had connection with on the outside, or people that I like and that I care about on the inside, but I had to hold at arm's length because I realized like they're not living consistent with the values that I want to have in my life. And that was hard, because when you go through things with people, you develop that kind of bond or that relationship, but eventually you realize like you have to make, or I realized I had to make a decision for myself, and I couldn't allow that bond or that past experience to define where I was going in the future.
Do you feel you would have ended up in the same spot where you are now had you not gone in?
I have no idea, because I was really like I said, I had no direction. I had no idea. I was just I was just a ball of kind of anxiety and anger and frustration and depression. I remember somebody described it really well. It felt like there was something chasing me. Like that was my life. It felt like there was something chasing me and I had to get away. So when you talked about demons, I could really kind of relate. So it was like I tried to drink it away or smoke it away or snort it away or screw it away. I tried to do everything I could to get away from that. And prison didn't really change that fundamentally, but it gave me enough of a respite. Like there were drugs in prison, there was insanity in prison, there was distraction, but it somehow gave me a chance to realize that there was another option. It like created a space in which I felt like I could actually make a choice. And it had to happen over and over. Like I made bad decisions. I never shot heroin until I went to prison. Like again, not an ideal situation, but I needed something. I needed something to stop me from running full speed, full bore, like kind of creating chaos around me. And I guess that could have been anything. That could have been, an injury. That could have been a person in my life. That could have been, I don't know. But I just know that this, up to that point, was the only thing that worked. This was the only thing that stopped me long enough to kind of redirect and choose where I wanted to be.
Yeah, it's funny that you said an injury because you made me think of someone. There's a documentary called Murder Ball. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. And it is about the United States paraplegic rugby team. And their captain is this guy, Mark Zupan. And he was on, I think it was Larry King. And Larry King asked him if there was a cure that would he allow him just to get up and walk out of his chair and never need his chair again. Would he take it? And Mark Zupan said, no. He's like, this chair has given me more in my life than I had before. He's like, I'm a Olympic level athlete. I'm on the Larry King show. He's like, it's part of why I am who I am. So it's just interesting that, I feel like too many people like let the negative aspects of their life define who they are, opposed to kind of making a concerted effort to be like, I'm not going to let it define who I am, and I'm going to try to be happy.
Yeah. I mean, there's a philosophy or an idea. I came across this guy in prison who introduced me to mindfulness meditation, reintroduced me to martial arts, and was really kind of pivotal in the shift of becoming the person that I am. And then I found a teacher on the outside that I've worked with for years. And what he always says basically is to whatever comes, welcome it. It's like, if you've ever read Rumi, wrote a poem called The Guest House, which is, saying whatever comes along, like the joy or the sorrow, like invite it in, welcome it in. And that's really become the philosophy that I try to embrace. And I don't always succeed and I don't always like remember it. But, the terrible things in my life, the pain, the destruction, the stress, the whatever really has often shaped me in the best possible way.
You still there? Did we lose connection? Uh-oh. Oh, are you back?
I'm back.
Sorry
about that.
No worries. It happens. It's like I love and hate Zoom all at the same time.
I don't know what the last thing you heard was.
You were talking about the guest house and mindfulness and trying to, welcome in, whatever life throws in your way, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just recognizing that whatever comes along is an opportunity, and it's not pleasant. It may not be enjoyable. It wouldn't be what we seek out. And I wouldn't go to seek out further stress or further pain or further sadness, but recognizing that whatever comes along, I have the choice of how I'm going to receive that and whether I'm going to welcome it in and learn what I can learn, whether I'm going to try to push it away and kind of hide in my hole and like make things worse.
So what are some of the most common misconceptions or things you still run into with either people's preconceived notions or prejudice against someone who's done time?
Well, the misconception I get most, I've probably gotten this question, I don't know, maybe 1,000 times on social media about, is it true about dropping the soap? And I remember thinking that, like, if people really think that sexual assault is dependent upon like a single exterior activity, like somebody was in no way a predator, but then the soap dropped and they saw it. And that one just blows my mind, because when people ask it as a joke, it's like, okay, like you're trying to, use levity or whatever. But when people ask it seriously, it just blows my mind in the way that they think about the world. But I think it's what you said before. People don't really think about it, but yeah, more than 90% of the people in prison are going home one day. And yet we don't think about that. We don't think about the importance of rehabilitation. We don't think about the importance of actually treating and giving people the tools to deal with things that they were dealing with poorly in the first place. Because if we had people who weren't able to function in society, then we removed them and put them with all the other people who weren't able to function with society, and didn't give them any new tools or training, and then wonder why they can't function in society when they get out. I mean, it's kind of obvious when you think about it. Like, the prison system doesn't make sense. But then really, I guess the biggest thing is we think of prisoners, or some people think of prisoners as bad people because of the bad things that they've done or the acts that they've done that have been harmful. But what I've found is that there's a quote, and I can't remember exactly what it is, but that violence is something no one has ever done. No one has ever been a violent actor before they've been a recipient of violence. Like, it's always born in our experience. And the stories of trauma and abuse and these horrible things that I heard from all the guys in prison, or at least most of the guys in prison, really changed my perspective of even some of the guys that I was scared of, or I didn't like, or I kind of judged while I was in there. And then when you hear the story of what they went through, all of a sudden it kind of humanizes that aspect. It humanizes the fact that this was a person who was in a great deal of pain, who then continued to spread that pain to other people. And that doesn't make what they did okay. That doesn't even make it, it's forgivable, but it makes it understandable. And I think that as we can see ourselves in prisoners, Jordan Peterson, who I don't necessarily, is a complicated guy, but he said something that I thought was really interesting. He said, we need to read history from the perspective of the essentially the wrongdoer rather than the hero. Because if we're not understanding how people got into that place, we're not being honest with ourselves, and we're not understanding, what the human capacity is. When we see the world as we're always the good guy and somebody else is the bad guy, we're not actually empathizing with other people. We're not actually being honest about the human capacity for terrible things. It's just an interesting perspective that I think we don't teach, or we don't learn a lot.
Yeah, I mean, and kind of throwing it to major motion pictures, I think that was one of my favorite things about the whole Avengers franchise is Thanos thought he was the only good guy, and it's no one thinks they're the villain. No one thinks they're a bad person. And it's cliche, but it's, people aren't bad. It's like their acts are bad. They're, I'd say the majority of people are redeemable in one way or another. And it's kind of tragic just to see us being the largest, most powerful country in the world just throw people away, basically. And it's kind of depressing.
Great. I mean, and there is hope. There are things that are doing differently. People always talk about the Norwegian prison system, which is actually focused on restoration and restorative justice and rehabilitation. And it's incredibly successful. They have lowest recidivism rate in the world. But they didn't start focusing on this in the way that it is until 2007. This is a relatively recent phenomenon where they've said, okay, let's look at the science. Let's look at what makes sense, and let's put the system into place. And you have a group called Amen that's working with the North Dakota prison system, with the Oregon prison system, with some prisons in California, and saying, hey, it doesn't make sense to spend a ridiculous amount of our state budget on a system that doesn't work. So let's try this. Let's try this other system. And they're putting these programs into place and finding great success. And there's a lot of kind of entrenched resistance from staff, or even from, politicians who say, well, if we don't punish people, how are we going to feel better about ourselves?
Right.
Right. But it is slowly shifting, at least in some places. And I mean, I think it's kind of the state of our divided country right now, where things are going both kind of opposite directions in different places, where we have more about punishment in some areas and more about rehabilitation in others. But eventually it comes down to funding. There's a group that I'm hoping to work with that helps inform prosecutorial practices. And they apply to both those people who are interested in the social aspect, or care about, the human aspect, as well as the financial aspect. And what they found is that the same policies that produce people that are, more rehabilitated, that are less likely to reoffend, that are more likely to contribute, are also the cost-effective policies. And it's interesting,
right, because you're going to keep those people out of prison, mostly.
Exactly.
Yeah. So at what point were you I need to become a TikTok person and get this out there? And I mean, right away were you I'm going to make a ton of this, or were you just I don't know, I'll try it once or twice and see what happens?
I did not expect this at all. So while I was locked up, I mean, I didn't know I was getting out. I still had 10 years left on my sentence when I was released last year. I had put in for a petition for clemency, and they gave me an hour and a half's notice, hey, Mr. Crosson, you're going home. And I was oh. So I had,
they gave you an hour and a half?
Oh yeah, I had an hour and a half's notice that I was being released. So I had this loose idea, I had gone to college while I was inside, again, because I was, I had a mother who was amazing and allowed me to do that. I had gotten a license as a journeyman electrician. So I thought okay, I'm going to get out and be an electrician and just do what I can, and not forget my buddies inside and send them a card every once in a while. But instead, my girlfriend said, you need to do this. Like, people are going to care about your story. And I thought she was crazy. I really did. But the whole time I was inside, I always said I was going to go to the top of a mountain. I was going to eat Chinese food, and I was going to have sex. Like, that was going to be my kind of celebration.
Yeah.
But what it really was, that was like making light of it. What it really was, there was a lot of trauma, and there were a lot of experiences that were very heavy to carry with me through prison. And I never felt like I could really put them down. Like, there were times, when the cell doors locked, I felt safe, I felt okay, but I could never fully put it down. And what I wanted to do was go to the top of that mountain and kind of leave that stuff behind, like cry, scream, do whatever I had to do. So I went to do that. And my girlfriend said, you need to like record this. You need to tell this story. And so I did. I climbed to the top of the mountain, and I just made a video, and it wasn't as emotional. Like, some of the stuff was very private because it was very personal. And I definitely wasn't as open at that point. But I did. I just got to the top of the mountain. And I said, hey, I just got out of prison like 3 weeks ago, and I'm trying to figure out my life, and I'm trying to move forward. And all of a sudden it got this incredible response. And people said, oh, well, we have questions, or we want to hear this story, or we're interested, or, please tell us about this. And it started building. And now I've been out for about 10 and a half months. And I mean, like, I literally spend hours and hours a day doing social media questions and making videos and interacting or doing podcasts. And it's taken on a life of its own that I did not expect to be doing. But that's incredibly gratifying. In some cases, it's gratifying. It's healing. It's the ability to connect with, survivors of crime who say, hey, it helps me to hear somebody take accountability for their actions, because that helps me feel like there's some chance of rehabilitation for the person who hurt me. Or it's somebody who has a family member who's locked up who says, my son's in prison, and I need hope that he's going to be okay. I need hope that he's going to come out a better person. And it's these interactions that are more meaningful than the vast majority of my interactions on a daily basis, because they're about something very real and kind of visceral and significant.
That's really great. Do you get any of the opposite, where people, say they shouldn't let you out, or, whatever?
Oh yeah, that they should have killed me, that they should have put a bullet in my brain, that I'm a terrible person, and I tell you, the general trollish comments don't really bother me, because it's one of the things I'm grateful for is I really have come into like a consistent life with my values and with who I am, but I still have insecurities, and I still have things that I know I need improvement on. So when somebody's like, hey, you're an asshole and you need to die, it doesn't bother me. But when somebody points out something that like I am insecure about, like, I remember I did something for my girlfriend's birthday that I thought was really sweet, but somebody pointed out, they were like, you're so selfish. You made this about you, and you didn't make this about her. And all of a sudden I was like, man, am I really, like, do I need to be more open in a relationship? And I had to talk to her about it, because it was like, man, I couldn't sleep. I was like, God, I'm not doing the right thing. So when somebody does that, like, those are the really like smart and kind of devious trolls. And those are the ones that get to me. But the other ones, it kind of makes me sad, because the same mindset, and this is all over social media, this isn't about me, but the same mindset of trying to hurt other people with our words is the same mindset that people say, like, people deserve to go to prison for. Like, you like hurting other people, so you're a bad person, but then you're out here hurting other people with your words. And what it is, it's people in pain who are hurting other people, like hurt people. And I think it's unfortunate, because people need help. The people in the prison system need help so they can turn their lives around. And a lot of people on social media need help so they can go in a different direction that's not about hurting other people's feelings.
Yeah, it's always like physical damage is so much easier to heal from than, psychological damage, for sure. But you made me think of there's a John Mulaney bit where he talks about how like 13-year-olds make fun of you, but in an accurate way, where he's like, oh, look at that man over there, he's got womanly hips, and he's like, oh, that's the one thing I'm really sensitive about. But yeah, it's you're right. It's those insults that, for whatever reason, even if they're not necessarily meant as insults, that they just hit like a little too close to home and dig up that your own trauma.
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, that's the thing. Like, God, I mean, you go through different experiences. Like, especially one of the things that I've found is it's the easiest to hurt the people that we love, or the people that we know the best, and that's why we have to really be careful. And I look at the relationships in my life, and I try to be really conscious, because once you've been close to somebody for a long time, or once you really know somebody and love somebody, like, you know how to hurt them, and they know how to hurt you. So like my girlfriend and we made rules for fighting, which she did back when she was a kid with her brother. Like, okay. And it is like, okay, we can disagree, we can argue, like we can do these things, but you never say something out of time. You never like use something as a weapon. You never, just these really simple ideas that I think a lot of people don't have. And one of the best things that I've done is, have a lot of honest, ideas, and kind of talking about how we're going to have conversations, how we're going to have arguments, how we're going to settle disputes, how we're going to do these things. And that was only possible because we started our relationship when we couldn't have a physical opponent while I was still inside. And this was during COVID when we couldn't have visits, so we couldn't see each other. Like we didn't meet physically until the day that I got out, which was another weird experience. But we were basically in a committed relationship. But we had spent like untold hours or hundreds of hours discussing, kind of doing a data dump of our lives, but also our values and what we wanted, and kind of setting a framework for our relationship. It makes me think of those old timey relationships that started, where you would write letters for months and then, we'd
My dearest Virginia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It works. There's something to be said for it.
It's an interesting way of looking at dating, opposed to like going out to have dinner and drinks and kind of put on your fakest best.
Exactly.
No, I love cats. That kind of thing.
Well, I mean, because we have this buffet mentality where it's like, I want this thing in front of me, and men or women, like we want the validation. We want either to get laid, or we want somebody to tell us we're pretty, or we want whatever we're getting, and we become the person that says that. Like there's a dishonesty to so much dating, and there's so much interacting about pleasing the other person and trying to get what we want that leads to some really bad behaviors, where I think probably the best thing that we could do when we first go on a date is tell the other person, like, hey, these are all the ways that I'm fucked up. Like, these are my problems. Like, what about yours? Like, are we compatible? Can we even like figure out if this makes sense? And take everything else off the table, because otherwise what you develop is like a physical interaction, or, a certain level of physical intimacy, but no actual emotional intimacy, no honesty. It's all about like, Instagram and like the kind of touched up picture, rather than like, yeah, I got a really bad toe, and like I got this weird mole, and yeah, my arm didn't hang quite right, and let's start with that. Like let's reverse catfish each other, so when we do meet in person, everything's better.
Yeah, and there's always this weird like, I don't want to show the person how much I like them because they haven't shown me that level. It's like this weird like arms race of like, all right, I'll let you know I like you a little bit more. Oh, they still like me. All right, I'll let you know and like that whole like no one wants to say I love you first kind of. It's dating's horrible.
Yeah. I have to say I'm grateful to have gotten out to a stable relationship rather than trying to navigate the world of dating like after prison. I just don't think that would have gone well.
Yeah. So what has been like the biggest surprise since you got out, as far as I think there was a video of you trying some sort of cheese, and you're like blown away.
Yeah,
halloumi, that's what it was. But like like what has been the biggest surprise? Like what are you are you binge watching things? Like what's been the best part of getting out, I suppose?
I haven't watched a lot of TV. Like we're trying to watch TV together so that we have an activity to do at night. Because I mean, we both are so exhausted by the end of the day that like we want to have a conversation, but we sit down, we talk for 5 minutes, and then we're like, we're gonna do something, we're gonna go to bed. There's this whole idea of like learning through stress and like using stress as a growth experience. And one of the things that's consistently found through this is an appreciation of things. And I remember looking into this when I started reading Viktor Frankl and his experience in the Holocaust, and just it really appealed to me because that's been my experience. Is that everything is like amazing. Being able to eat the food that I want, being able to sleep, where I want on a comfortable bed, being able to go out into the woods when I want, being able to take the dog out for a walk. Like I do a gratitude list every day. And the things on there, people are like, dude, are you serious? Like you're thankful for coffee? I was like, if you've had bad coffee for 20 years, every time you get real good coffee, you're damn right I'm thankful. Like I get up every morning and I smell it and I'm like, and I think that there's a danger of that going away. There's a danger of losing that appreciation and starting to take things for granted. But I've kind of consciously focused, and I continue to try to consciously focus on appreciating these small things and keeping the perspective that, 10 and a half months ago, this wasn't a possibility. Like none of this was a possibility. And staying connected to that is really, the whole idea that happiness isn't, wanting what we don't have. Happiness is wanting what we do have, like wanting and appreciating where we are and what we have. It doesn't mean we don't have aspirations, but the world is pretty amazing, and it's really easy to get lost in whatever we're, thinking or judging or needing or, all that. And I find myself doing it more and more, but I don't know, as I look out my window right now and I can see a tree, there was 20 years I wasn't able to get within an arm's length of a tree. And like, that's pretty special. And it may not seem very special to other people, but let me tell you.
Yeah. It's weird. It's all the stuff that we take for granted that, I don't think people really understand. And that goes back to one of those like stereotypical thoughts about prison where people be like, oh, they're getting fed, they get three square meals a day and a place to sleep, and all they get to do is, you know, hang out and work out. And been like, yeah, but they can't do anything they want. Like it's just such a lack of perspective on the basic, simplest things. And I feel like those of us that were suffering through like quarantine and lockdown months ago is like, all I wanted to do was hang out with my friends. Like that was, so I can't imagine that for 19 years.
I remember I was still locked up for, you know, the beginning of the pandemic until the end of 2021. But somebody sent me a picture of a meme, and it was like Kermit the Frog with the remote, and it says "prisoners on quarantine." Like, we're good, we're chilling, we gotta do this. And there was a certain truth to that, because I mean, I spent months locked in my cell by myself. Like I'd worked my way to a single cell, and it was the only time that I like kind of regretted that, because I had like months in the cell by myself at the beginning of the quarantine because we couldn't interact, we couldn't do anything, and I didn't have anybody to talk to. So I'm just like staring at the wall or watching TV or rereading the same book that I've read 17 times, you know. It was a limited experience, but at the same time, I had learned how to build a structure in a place and there wasn't any. And I learned how to, you know, make it as meaningful as possible.
Do you consider yourself a content creator now?
I remember the first time somebody said that, I was like, yeah, I don't think, I mean, yeah, I make videos, but I kind of feel like all I'm doing is telling stories. All I'm doing is sharing experiences. I guess the idea of like, I don't want to do something that's kind of like kitschy. And that's what I think of when I think of content creator, but that's not true, because I've done like stupid trends. People have been like, look, we'd love to get your take on this. But no, I mean, I'm waiting to hear back from a full-time position. I have another one waiting. Like, I mean, I have a kind of real life or like real responsibilities outside of social media. But yeah, it's an amazing opportunity to kind of put myself out in the world and interact with people and do things that I'm incredibly grateful for. It's something that I, you know, I get stressed out because I spend hours doing, or because, you know, it can create stress when it's like, oh, honey, like, I know I want to do this, but I still have 7,000 comments I have to respond to, and like trying to find that way in our relationship. But no, I mean, I'm grateful for whatever this is, like whatever you want to call it. It's been an amazing opportunity that I never could have imagined.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like the oldest. I mean, I think when I think of a content creator, I think of someone who is being genuine, and it's kind of like, even if you're doing something silly, it's still kind of a part of you. But telling stories is legitimately the oldest form of entertainment there is, you know, and you know, sitting by a campfire and just talking and telling a story and being able to take those moments in your life that are worth talking about, whether they're silly or serious, or, you know, engaging in some way, and being able to relay it in a way that's entertaining to other people. And you do it in, what is it, 60 seconds? Is that what the limit on TikTok is?
Usually, I mean, I do like longer form videos on YouTube, but that's still, it's so funny because when I used to write essays, I used to do everything slow and long form and these long developed, thought out processes. So when I first started doing TikToks, I was like, how do you possibly fit anything in 60 seconds? And now like I'll do a podcast, or I'll go on TV, or I'll like try to do a YouTube video. And I'm like, all right, I made it to like 57 seconds. What do I do now? Like, I've condensed everything so much. I mean, that's a danger, because like I was a voracious reader for the whole time that I was in prison. I usually read between 2 and 4 books a week. It was the main thing that I did for like entertainment and stimulation. And since I've been out, I've probably read 2 books. Like I've jumped into this kind of like shallower or faster paced world. And I kind of miss that sometimes. Like I have 3 books sitting on the table in the other room, and I'm like, all right, today's going to be the day, and I'm going to get in and I'll make it like 10 pages, and then I'll set it down for a week and I won't pick it back up. And I miss that. I miss the depth. But at the same time, I recognize that, you know, if I can convey a message, somebody told me this a long time ago, because I'm really interested in policy. Like the job I'm waiting to hear back with is a research fellow for an institution that does policy work, basically. Okay. But that policy doesn't change until culture changes, and culture changes by conversation. It changes by humanizing people. It changes through, you know, social interaction. So if I can have an impact on culture that makes policy that is more humane, more geared towards public safety, more geared towards something that I think we can be proud of 50 years from now, I think that is as significant, if not a more significant impact. And it feels very like kind of audacious or ridiculous to say that. But at the same time, I see that. I get these messages all the time from somebody who says, you know, I always just thought people in prison were, you know, pieces of crap. And then like watching your videos, I realized like that could have been me. And when we can have that shift, like I had to have that shift. I had to have
Yeah.
people open my eyes to the fact that, the there, but for the grace of God go I. For so many people, I think that's the moment at which it's not just about political and policy change. Like that's literally how we make better people. When we can empathize with other people, when we can see the world as a group of us rather than us and them, like that's like a huge shift. And if I can have any part in that, I'm incredibly happy with the effect that I'm going to have.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard to be judgmental of someone when you see yourself in their spot, or it's the same thing when it's like, someone will be like, oh, you should never drink and drive, blah, blah, blah. I mean, like, wait, didn't you like drive when you shouldn't have at that Christmas party? Whatever. Oh yeah, but that was different. Like everyone's got an excuse. But I was actually talking about you at lunch because I went to lunch with a friend and I'm like, oh, I'm recording this podcast and it's a TikTok, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, oh, and he was innocent. I'm like, no, man, like he was like, I did what I did. And she's like, oh, and that was when she became interested. And it was like the idea of like that you're not blaming someone else, that you're like, this was my sentence and this is how I did my time. And these are the questions that people are asking me. And I think that sincerity is what is really compelling.
Yeah. Well, I'm fascinated by the fact that America is, this obsessed with, second chance stories or redemption stories, but then is like, once a criminal, always a criminal. It's like either you believe in this and you want to believe in this or you don't, but there is a middle ground. There's a conservative politician in the state that I met with a few months ago. And I sat down with him. I said, look, most of the people in your party are not about criminal justice reform. Like, what's the difference? Like, why do you support the things you do? Because I'm really inspired by a lot of the work that he does. And he said, I'm a pastor. Like, and religion is a story about redemption. Like, how can I not believe in redemption as a pastor? Like, I'd feel like a total hypocrite. And so you have this like divide where you have these very progressive people, you have these very kind of evangelical people. Like, there's this universal ability to kind of either separate people or kind of unite people regardless of what side people are on politically or religiously or socially. And it really is ultimately about whether we want to bring people together or take them apart. And if being authentic and sharing my best and my worst and just being open about it can somehow like bring people together or somehow start conversations, I mean, that's amazing because that's really all I have to offer. Like, I'm not that good of an artist. I don't have that many other things going for me.
Yeah, but I mean, I like what you're doing is creative in a way. Like I said, it's that earliest form of entertainment is telling a story, and you do a very good job of communicating and telling a story. And I think that's why it's compelling, and it really does. Perfect example is I remember when the vaccine was coming out. There were talk where they were giving it to prisoners first because they're in such close contact with people and have no choice to be. And I was talking to this woman and she's like, that's wrong. They're all murderers and child molesters and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I mean, and guys that maybe got caught selling a bag of weed, like, you can't always just jump to the worst possible case. There's 1,000 reasons why people are in there and some just can't afford bail. It's a tough situation, or some guy that lost his job and can't pay child support, now is inside. I think people always jump when they think of prison, they jump to the worst case scenarios, the Charles Mansons, and there's a lot more inside than just serial killers.
But that's the other thing, that the only reason I have stories to tell that are interesting is because I've had such a bizarre life, and I forget that. Like, I'd been out for like, or on TikTok for like 2 or 3 months before I decided to like tell people about having a serial killer as a cellmate. Cause I like in my mind, that was just normal. Like that just happens. And Courtney was like, are you effing kidding me? Like people are going to want to hear about this. I was like, they're not. Like he wasn't that interesting. She's like, oh no. And sure enough, that was like the most viral video I ever did. And again, I don't have any perspective because I don't have like a normal, I have to ask people like, what's interesting? Like, what do you want to hear about? People are like, we want to hear about the toilets that don't flush or that you have limited flushes on. Like, why is that?
Oh, that blew me away. That blew me away when you were talking about that. I was like, why would they limit the flushes of the toilet? And then like had to stop and think about it. I'm like, oh yeah. They can flood the cells or whatever it is. Oh, I actually do have a note here. What is a green dot?
Okay, so a green dot was kind of a precursor to Cash App. It was you would go to a store or you would go online and you would buy a Green Dot, which was like a prepaid credit card, and then you could send somebody that number, and it was, it was $50 or $100 or $500.
Okay.
And that was the way a lot of transactions happened before Venmo and Cash App and these other things became as popular as they were. So people would, this guy inside would give somebody a bag of dope. His, family would then give him a Green Dot number. He would give it to the other guy. They would check the number and withdraw the money.
Oh, okay. That was the one, like, I don't know what he's talking about. So, so what's next? You said you're have a couple of full-time jobs potential, but like, I mean, do you see your TikTok and your content creation as a limited time thing, or do you intend to do it continued on, or like what do you, or is there a plan?
There's a loose plan. One, I feel like, my story may be interesting, but my story only kind of gets me in the door. And one of the things I want to start doing is highlighting other people's stories. And I'd really like to have a platform in which I can kind of tell those stories of people who are making the best of their second chance. I did an interview with a friend out in California for YouTube, for like part of the podcast we were trying to do. I've got a guy who's really fascinating because he's 34 years old and he spent, I think, like 7 years in prison, and nobody knows it. He went to school. He's the CFO of like a nonprofit. Like, he's this really successful guy, and nobody knows that he was in prison, and he didn't even talk about it. So finally, when we went out to dinner and we were talking about it, he was like, "Man, I didn't realize how bad I needed to talk to somebody about this, to be able to like relate and be, seen and heard and understood." And so, like, I want to tell his story. I want to basically point out the fact that none of the people he went to college with, like none of the people he's been around, know this. And this is something that you'll find. Like, people in the world are like, okay, prisoners are bad people and people out here are good. It's like, you don't know what your neighbor did. You don't know what your neighbor got away with. Like, you don't know who the people around you are unless you listen to their stories. So I'm hoping that I can kind of spread more stories. I am interested in policy, and I hope that I can have an influence on policy through work either with the nonprofit that I'm waiting to hear back from or a few other opportunities. Some of the other job offers that I have are like not in the field of reform, and they're just kind of like something I could do to make money. But I look at it as if I can learn a new skill set, if I could go work with a content creation company, or I could go work doing comms work or PR work, like it gives me a new skill set and a new idea of how to work, so I can advocate for different bills, because we haven't had a really great success. Like, I went to go speak 4 times at the General Assembly this year, and only 2 of the bills passed, and they didn't actually go into law. They just went into a study. Trying to figure out what I can do to use my experience and then kind of match my lived experience with the kind of research side or the evidence-based experience to say, hey, this is what makes sense. Like, this is what's backed up by evidence. This is what makes most sense financially and socially and just based humanely. And hopefully, have some kind of impact, because the biggest thing that I learned on the inside is that a life lived just for ourselves is really not very meaningful and not very happy and not very like engaging. And when we can find a way to do things for other people and engage in an interest in other people and relationship with other people, that, at least for me, is where life becomes meaningful.
Yeah. And it's interesting is like a life lived just for yourself is probably 90% of the reason why most of those people are in there.
It's why I was there. And the thing is, people think like prisoners are, self-righteous, and I was miserable. Like, I was suicidal. Like, I hated myself. Like, I didn't do that because I was like a bad person who did, like, I was desperate for connection and interaction and some guidance and mentor. I was desperate for those things, and I didn't know how to find them. And I think that when we can see, again, people as like miserable who make bad decisions rather than people who are just malicious, it kind of changes the discussion. And all of a sudden we can see, we can see ourselves in them, or we can see someone we know in them, and we can kind of shift the perspective. So,
yeah. Well, I think what you're doing is really amazing. And I encourage our listeners to go check out @2nd_chancer on TikTok. And if you're not on TikTok, just get it. You'll waste several hours, but it's fun. Yeah, I think what you're doing is really great and is fascinating. And I hope you keep working on it, man. Like, is there anything else you want to plug? I mean, I know you have a website, but like, where else can people find you?
Yeah, if you just look up Jesse Crosson, JESSE CROSSON, or Second Chancer, I've got a YouTube channel and Instagram and, pretty much all the platforms. But yeah, hopefully I'll be actually, at your state legislature, at your local prosecutor's office, or, working in the community, because the social media stuff is great and it's great to tell those stories. But again, I want to have an impact on the world. Like, I've done a lot of harm and I want to find a way to contribute. So hopefully I'll see you in the community. And if you see me, just say hi.
Awesome. Thanks, man. This was great. I feel like, that 45 minutes flew by. I can't believe it. Anytime you want to come back, you just let me know and we'll bring you back on, because this was great. And for our listeners, we'll catch you guys again next week. And make sure you go check out Jesse's YouTube channel and TikTok and whatever. And catch you guys.
Thanks, Andy.
And thanks for checking out the show today, listeners. If you enjoyed the content today, you can go over to patreon.com/Inebri-art to support the show. You can join over there for just a few dollars a month and help us provide this fun content that you just checked out. You can also email us at Inebri-art.com with your questions, complaints, and concerns, or you can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art or at Inebri-art6 on Instagram. And also don't forget to check out our other shows, Bar Talk Podcast, Old Colony Cast, Inebri-art, and all the other shows on the Inebri-art Network, which you can find at Inebri-art.com. So thanks again for listening.